Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas Kuncham, for joining with us for this interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'd like to start with what's going on in Burma since after the coup. I'm sure you have been following very closely about the development on the ground, and we've seen day and day a lot more human rights abuses, serious human rights abuses, and lots of demonstrators have been killed by the military troops. How do you describe the situation on the ground in terms of legal aspect?
Thank you very much. Well, in terms of the legal aspect, and that's the way we're looking at it, in terms of our mandate, we're looking to see whether there are crimes or serious violations of international law that fall within our mandate. And if I could, let me briefly explain a little bit about the mechanism. So we were established, the independent investigative mechanism from Myanmar, by the Human Rights Council, following reports about grave human rights abuses, particularly in Rakhine State clearance operations in 2017, but also the reports talked about a history of human rights abuses over many years. So we were given the mandate to look at the most serious international crimes and violations of international law committed on the territory of Myanmar since January 1st, 2011. Our mandate is ongoing, so it covers the crimes that happened since February, the crimes that happened today or tomorrow, if they fall within that description of the most serious international crimes and violations of international law. So legally, what are the most serious international crimes? They're generally viewed, and according to our terms of reference, they include genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And the crimes that we're particularly looking at, that we're concerned with in terms of the current situation, are crimes against humanity. There are very many different types of crimes, such as killing, such as imprisonment, the arbitrary arrest or detentions of individuals, enforced disappearances, where people are arrested or detained without information from the state being given to their family and others who are requesting it. Torture, of course, is a very serious international crime. These are international crimes. These amount to crimes against humanity when they are committed in the context of a widespread or systematic attack on a civilian population. So when the coup happened in February, given the history of Myanmar, we were very concerned and said we would be closely following the events. And we hoped they would be resolved without violence. But we've seen, as you said, an increasing use of violence. And what's very interesting is that the violence really didn't begin from day one. We saw a change of policy, it seemed, after a few weeks. And this change didn't happen just in one location, or one day. It happened all over Myanmar, many different locations at the same time. And we see more and more day after day after day. So when we look at the thousands who've been detained, arrested without legal process, when we look at reports of over 400 now killed in what appear to be largely peaceful demonstrations, we're very concerned that these are crimes against humanity, because the crimes appear both widespread, they're so numerous, so many victims, and particularly the crimes appear to be systematic. They seem to be occurring in many different places at the same time. Systematically, different groups have been targeted. Journalists, for example, human rights defenders, members of political parties opposed to the coup. So given all of this, we see these events as falling within our mandate. And so we're doing what we can to collect evidence of those crimes. And when you're talking about collecting evidence of crimes, of course, it's very important to prove not just that the crime happened, that victims suffered, but who is responsible and who bears the responsibility. And this could include the person who actually committed the crime, perpetrated it, let's say the man who fired the gun that killed a peaceful protester, but it also could involve and could implicate those who gave orders to fire that gun. It could even implicate commanders who failed to take, under international law, commanders are responsible to take all necessary and reasonable measures to prevent or punish such crimes against humanity. So this is a complex task to collect this evidence, but we're in the process of doing it. There's a great amount of evidence available now. People are sending it to us every day.
Just to take the particular point that you have mentioned in your talk earlier, I noticed that a week ago in your report or press release, you said what happening on the ground, it's amounted to crime against humanity. And now you're saying, are you calling it now this is a crime against humanity committed by the Burmese military?
Well, while we're at a very early stage of our investigation, I can say based on the many other crimes against humanity I've investigated around the world, that the evidence is amounting every day that these are crimes against humanity. The crimes are both widespread and they are systematic. We see this in the numbers that have been targeted, the many different locations where this has happened, the fact that it seems to follow often policies. It began with very little use or no use of lethal violence at the beginning of the coup against protesters to now regular use of lethal force against protesters. So yes, from the evidence that we have so far, and the investigation again is early, these amount to crimes against humanity.
As you said, the committed crime that we have seen ourselves as well, we've been reporting every day since after the coup. There has been increased more and more violence, crackdown on the demonstrator and killing. And it's a systematic across the country. It's not just in Yangon or in Mandalay, all over the country. But with your experience, the order comes from the top because it's so similar to everywhere in the whole country.
Well, this is exactly the kind of issues that we will be investigating and collecting evidence on. As you said, certainly there appears to be a systematic policy about using force because it's happening around the country in different locations under similar circumstances. And it's not something that those at the highest levels of responsibility could claim to be ignorant about. It's on the news every day. And then we even see statements by spokespersons about the violence, very, very concerned with the statement that those who protest could be shot in the head or in the back. There's no reason to shoot protesters in the back. There can be no threat of someone when you shoot them in the back. So all of this is the type of evidence we will be looking at and examining in determining who is responsible. If crimes are committed, who is responsible for those crimes?
How could the general public and the victim themselves help you to find those evidence? I know that you have been established since 2018 and started in 2019, and you've been collecting serious human rights abuses that cover since 2011. How could the victims and the public in Burma could help you with your work?
Thank you. Well, it's helpful to us when people who actually have personal information about crimes contact us. That could be that they witnessed crimes happening. What they witnessed would be relevant to us. Of course, there's challenges for us to contact, and ideally we'd like to interview people in person, but that's obviously very challenging right now. Also, in today's modern age, many people have videos or some type of recording that may document that a crime happened. That is helpful to us. What I should say that's not so helpful, so people don't spend their efforts and even put themselves at risk to send this to us, are videos that are already on the internet. We have an ability to preserve those and to keep those, and we don't need people to send us just what they saw on the internet, on Facebook, etc. But then the evidence that, of course, is the most valuable to us, and it's the hardest to collect in all cases, is evidence of exactly what orders were given, what reports were made of the violence through the chain of command, what policies were set. So those who have information, particularly about illegal orders that are clearly illegal under international law, we really urge them to contact us so we could obtain that evidence.
So that's the last point I want to recall again. So you're saying like even within the military rank and file, the one they receive the order which is illegal, for example, like to shoot and kill ordinary civilian demonstrator, they can record and send the information to you.
Yes. How to do that safely. We've given out information about how to use means of communication that we believe are safe, proton mail or signal. But what I would say is that those who receive an order, for example, to shoot peaceful protesters, international law is clear. That is an illegal order. And the person who receives the order actually has a responsibility not to obey it. And that it is not a defense when you're charged with international crimes to say I was just following orders. If the orders were clearly illegal, the responsibility of those receiving the orders is not to follow the order.
I've seen you have been working as a judge or prosecutor in lots of international tribunals and the court, including in Sierra Leone, former Yugoslavia, and Cambodia, East Timor. I don't mean to compare with the crime against humanity or any other human rights serious violation. What are you seeing now? What kind of similarity what have you have seen in this case in Burma?
Well, yes. What I've seen in these crimes against humanity in all these different places you mentioned, in all of these places I've been a prosecutor. First, from the victim standpoint, I see that for those who've suffered these crimes, of course, justice is very important. Of course, the first thing they want is for the crimes to stop, for their families to be safe. But in the longer term, they also want to see justice. What is justice? When I've talked to these people, whether from Yugoslavia or Darfur or Cambodia, Sierra Leone, they all want, first of all, for the world to recognize we suffered. This really happened to us. This is a true story. And secondly, they want to see those who are responsible for the suffering against them, against their family members, to be punished, for it to be recognized that they are responsible and for them to be punished for those crimes. And I think that's a phenomenon around the world. The world has changed in the last 25, almost 30 years now, when the Yugoslav Tribunal was established in 1993. That was the first effort to hold anyone responsible since the Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes tribunals, another generation plus earlier. But this was different. This wasn't one side winning a war holding the other side responsible. It's the idea that the world has a responsibility. The international community as a whole has a responsibility to hold individuals responsible for the most serious crimes against humanity. And this is the effort that's been going on for the last almost 30 years now. It's certainly imperfect. There isn't really an international court that all countries are part of that can investigate any crime. There are political realities that limit the effectiveness of international justice. But it is a phenomenon that exists and that is growing. And it changes the situation, I believe. It's a different situation today than it was 30 years ago. Those who are committing such crimes have to recognize that there is always now this possibility that they will be held responsible. They should not commit the crimes. They should, because international justice has a very long memory. You won't be able to sleep at night knowing there won't be eventually a knock on the door where international justice comes calling.
For example, like in Cambodia, you being a joint judge in the extraordinary chamber of Cambodia by the UN and also the Cambodia government. That's many years after the human rights violation committed, right? Can you explode a bit about it?
Thank you. So I was the international co-prosecutor for the Khmer Rouge Tribunal that was established by agreement between the United Nations and the government of Cambodia. But it took over almost 30 years to establish that court. Luckily, there had been organizations and individuals, academics and organizations like the Documentation Center for Cambodia that had been collecting evidence and preserving that evidence. I actually came to the Myanmar mechanism from that court. I was the international co-prosecutor, and just the year before we had received a conviction of the top surviving leader, the number 2 in the regime, Nun Chea, and Khieu Samphan, the former head of state. They were convicted in 2018 for crimes that they had committed back in the 1970s that had been completed in 1979. So it was almost 40 years later, they were actually finally convicted and held responsible for the crimes. So yes, I think this is an example of international justice having a long memory. It's also an example of the necessity to try to preserve evidence while we can, because of course, over time, documents or videos are lost, people's memory fades, some people pass away, both victims and other witnesses who have important evidence. Bodies, of course, would decompose that would have evidence of crimes. So for all of these reasons, I think that's why the Human Rights Council established this mechanism and similar mechanisms for Syria and for the crimes of the Islamic State, so that the evidence would be preserved.
So whatever crime they committed, with your independent investigative mechanism from Myanmar that you are collecting, so those who are committing crime, even though they may win, now able to control, but that their crime will still haunt them.
Yes, I mean, there's no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes. That's an important principle of international law that I'd like to explain to your viewers and remind them of. In most domestic law, there's a statute of limitation that crimes can only be prosecuted 10 or 20 years after the crime. But for international crimes, there is no statute of limitations. As long as the person is alive, they could still be charged with the crime. And we've seen, even in the last couple of years, we see prosecutions in Europe for perpetrators from the Second World War. And some of these are not very high level. They were just, at the time, in their early 20s, working in a concentration camp, but now being held responsible 60, 70 years later for what they did. So international justice has a very long memory.
Just back to the current crisis quickly. So right now, I mean, since you've been appointed as the head of the mechanism for Myanmar, you have been collecting all the serious human rights abuses, documenting it, and your mandate is also partly to involve with the International Criminal Code. Can you explain a bit about how it's related to ICC?
Well, it's important to keep in mind for your viewers, if I can explain, we are not a court. We ourselves are not like the Cambodian court that was established by the UN and the government of Cambodia, and not like the International Criminal Court, which is a court established by treaty. I believe there are now about 127 states that are members of that court. But part of our mandate, we are encouraged to cooperate with the International Criminal Court, which has an investigation ongoing concerning events in Rakhine State. And they have jurisdiction in that case because the court has ruled so far that some of the crimes were completed only when individuals crossed into Bangladesh. That was when they were legally deported from their country or illegally deported from their country. And Bangladesh, being a member of the court, the court has jurisdiction for crimes or for crimes where one element of the crimes is established on the territory of Bangladesh. So we're not the International Criminal Court, but we're encouraged to cooperate with them. Now, they do not have jurisdiction as of now for the ongoing crimes, for the issues of since the coup in February. They could get jurisdiction over those events in a couple of ways. One would be if Myanmar itself at any time refers the matter to the court, says we want you to investigate this. Or secondly, if the Security Council referred the matter to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council has done that a couple of times. It referred the events in Darfur to the International Criminal Court without the consent of the government of Sudan. And it also referred the situation in Libya to the International Criminal Court without the consent of the then Gaddafi regime in Libya. So there is some precedent for that. But that is a matter, not for me, that's for the Security Council to decide.
Apart from collecting evidence of serious human rights abuses and criminal act, internationally, what is your role and what will you be doing in the next few days internationally in the international event, for example, in order to stop the crackdown in the country, in Burma?
Our mechanism has a very specific mandate, and it's very important for us to do what we have been told to do and to confine ourselves to that. So that's another thing that I think it's important to explain to your viewers. There are others that have a wider mandate to report on human rights abuses, such as the special rapporteur, or to talk about negotiations or political settlements of the situation. So other parts of the United Nations, such as the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Myanmar, it's not the mandate that we have. So it's important. I think we play an important role, and I believe we can contribute in some way. We hope to deter crimes, and hopefully this will improve the situation. And we certainly hope for a solution, a peaceful solution to the situation. But it's important that we stick within our mandate, and that's what we'll do. We'll be simply collecting evidence of the most serious international crimes and violations of international law, and we'll be reporting what we can, because it's a criminal investigation. We don't normally tell people what we're doing. We don't say who our targets are or what the state of the evidence is. But we'll give some general reports about what we're doing to the Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.